Am I audible now? Yes. Thank you very much, Mrs. Dagmar Light. I wish to express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to Ms. Virginie Zajac, President of the European Union of Yoga, Catherine, member of the Executive Board, Mrs. Dagmar Light herself, Dr. Gezaji, the President of the Slovak Yoga Association, Ms. Karin Svitak, delegate from the Slovak Yoga Association, and to all other Zinal team members such as Dan Sayan for allowing me to be part of this event of immense historical importance. My dear friends, this weekend we are celebrating 50 years of yoga in Europe at this 48th Congress of the European Union of Yoga, which was founded in 1971. The topic of my presentation today is the inner path of yoga, something that I believe and practice, strive to practice myself. Apart from my asana practice, because since my mother, she has been a very close disciple of B.K.S. Iyengar, has studied with him for more than around 25 years. So most of my practice, asana practice, comes first from my father and then from my mother. And at the same time, there is a certain approach that my upbringing in places like Kailasashram gave me the purpose. Why do I practice asanas? Why yoga? So I want to talk a little bit about this today. But let us spend a few moments in silence, and then the traditional way of starting with a short mantra, with a short prayer, the meaning of which is simply, may all be happy, may all be free from diseases, may all experience what is pleasant, may no one experience suffering. Peace, peace, peace in the world. I don't desire kingdoms, nor heaven, or not even freedom from transmigration. All I desire is the eradication of suffering for all those beings who are tormented by it. This is the meaning of the mantras that I will be reciting, and then after a few moments of silence, we will plunge into the discussion. So let's have a few moments of silence just to settle down. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः विश्वशान्तिः। न त्वहं कामये राज्यं, न स्वर्गं न पुनर्भवं, कामये दुःखतप्तानां प्राणिनाम् आर्तिनाशनम्। ॐ My dear friends in yoga, as said earlier, the topic of my presentation today is the inner path of yoga. So what do I mean by the inner path of yoga? By the inner way of yoga, what do I understand? The yogic practices are the same, but the approach, when I practice whatever yogic practices I'm practicing, whether it is asanas, pranayama, meditation, mantra yoga, japa, yoga nidra, the different practices of yoga, when I practice them with the purpose that I wish to train and better understand my mind, or as it is called in the yogic texts, the inner instruments. In the same way as yogic postures do help us acquire a better understanding of our physical body, they can also be used to have a better insight into our mind, specifically buddhi, as it is called in Sanskrit, the faculty of the mind with which we know, we understand, we comprehend. Because ultimately that is the core tool through which we understand everything, and the approach that Patanjali has to yoga is to clean that instrument. Just imagine if that instrument, like a telescope, would be made up of glasses and mirrors, then each and every glass and each and every mirror has to be clean to be able to see into the sky with utmost clarity. In the same way, no matter what we want to use it to look at, whether something out there or something in ourselves, and obviously for a yogi, looking within oneself is the most important thing, but no matter what we look at, since this is the only instrument that we have, the yogic masters work on cleaning it, on making it still and stable. And first of all, before we can do these two things, to actually understand it, to comprehend the tool itself. This would be, in a nutshell, the purpose of the inner path of yoga. So in the same way as observing the body in various postures gives us a better understanding, a deeper insight into the workings of our body. Similarly, learning to observe the mind, which includes this stream of thoughts, simply when it engages in the external world, that would be the first faculty. When that stream of thought is being used to understand something, to comprehend something, by analyzing it, by thinking about it, then it is called intellect, the second faculty. When the same stream of thought is directed towards one's perceived notion of the self, not the true self, but one's perceived notion of the self, then we call it the ego. And when it engages with memories, then we call it memory, the four faculties that Patanjali speaks of in the very beginning. And out of these, the intellect. And here I have to point out something that, since I'm now speaking in English, usually in the English mind, there is a disconnect between intellect and the heart. Usually we speak of being intellectual and being inspired by the heart, as if they are two different things. But in Sanskrit yogic texts, this distinction does not exist. In fact, the faculty of understanding is, in the yogic texts, often referred to by the word which translates into English as the heart. Why? And many times people get confused. How can the intellect be the heart? But in fact, this is because, in the same way, like the physical body, the core of the physical body is the heart. It's really the very core of the subtle body. And the subtle body is nothing but just the energies acting within the physical body, the pranas, the senses, and the four inner faculties that I'm talking about. And since buddhi, the intellect, is the very core of the subtle body, like the heart is the core of the physical body, sometimes the word heart is used. Quite often, in fact, the Sanskrit word for the heart is used for the intellect. And that is why in the Sanskrit mind, this disconnect or this polarity between the intellect and the heart does not exist. So I request you that in this talk, at least, when I'm using the word intellect, don't see it as something separate from the heart, but something that includes the heart, by which I mean the divine feelings of love, loving kindness, compassion, forgiveness, which are central which are central to clean the intellect that Patanjali speaks of. In the very beginning, the moment he starts speaking about cleaning the intellect, the first thing he gives us several practices, and the first one that he gives is cultivating loving kindness. We all know it as metta meditation. It is a standard meditation practiced by so many Buddhist practitioners, and yet the Buddha himself spoke of it as if a practice that he received from his teachers. It's an extremely ancient practice. Contemporary yoga masters, contemporary to the Buddha, such as Panchashikha, they speak of it. So that is the first practice to refine, to clean the lenses, to clean the mirrors of the intellect. So that's why please don't get, in English, yes, intellect is different from the heart, but I'm using the English word intellect today for the Sanskrit word, which in the Sanskrit understanding very much includes the heart. It very much incorporates what we understand by the heart. So when we observe the body in asanas for a longer period of time, it gives us a better understanding of our body. In the same way, when we learn to observe the intellect in an asana itself, even if we are meditating, we are sitting in an asana. So in various states, it gives us a better understanding, a deeper insight into the workings of our mind. The better we understand an instrument, the more effectively we can use it for a purpose, for attaining a goal. This is why it is so important to read a user's manual carefully before using an electronic gadget such as a camera. If you want to use it for the best purpose, then we need to know all the different functions, all the different capabilities and possibilities that are there. So then, depending on the situation, we can do different settings and then make the best out of it. Otherwise, I have seen, I bought an extremely expensive camera. Until I did not properly learn how to use it, the pictures were all blurred, fuzzy. A cheaper camera would have been far better than using such an expensive camera. So the various practices of yoga make it possible for us to create and write our own user's manual for our body, for our mind, and all the instruments that are at work in them. This is why observing the body through asanas, the breath through pranayama, which is deeply connected to our emotions, and the mind through meditation is of utmost importance, so that we gain an insight. We don't even need to worry whether we are meditating correctly or not. One of my teachers used to say, you cannot meditate wrong. You either meditate or you don't meditate. And when you meditate always correctly. You cannot meditate wrong. So asana, pranayama, and meditation would be the key practices in the inner way of yoga, but it's the approach that we have towards them. This is because they give us the opportunity to observe the workings of the numerous components which make our body, mind apparatus. But the practices that aren't just limited just to those three practices. It may include many other supportive yogic practices, such as I've already talked about: cultivating loving kindness, compassion, etc., which are included into our meditation practices. When we embark on the inner path of yoga, one key aspect is that yoga and its practices should not remain limited to our yoga mat, but they have to be brought into every aspect of our lives for them to be totally effective and potent. Our yoga mat is just like when we start learning to drive a car. We first start in a safe area. And once we feel some confidence, then gradually we go out from that safe area. So our yoga shala, our yoga hall, our yoga room, our peaceful corner, which we have chosen to sit down in meditation, all of these, they are safe spaces where we can explore, where we can experiment, where we can discover different layers of our beings. But then at some point, gradually, when we gain confidence, when we think that we have gained some insight into the workings of the inner faculties through these practices, then gradually we have to take what we learn into our daily life. Yes, in ancient times, masters went into retreats, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. Even today, I'm sitting in a place, Rishikesh, today known as the world capital of yoga. It has attracted people since millenniums from all over India, and for the last 40, 50, 60 years from all over the world, seeking to understand, to gain a deeper understanding into yoga. But why? To remain here. One of the rules of the monastery in which I was brought up, because no other ashram in Rishikesh has this rule. You can remain in an ashram as long as you want, all your life. But in this particular ashram, Kailas Ashram, the name of which was taken in the beginning by Mrs. Blight at the beginning of the introduction, in that ashram, once the education is over, a person had to leave. And now it's they and the world. They have to test themselves in the world. They cannot remain part of it anymore. Till when will they remain in a safe space? Now what they have learned, it's time to go back and test it. And then share it with others. So how to do that? How to bring it into every aspect of our lives? See, for example, in zoology, if we wish to understand the behavior of an animal, then we have to spend time observing it in its natural habitat. We may observe it in a laboratory or some other confined spaces, such as at a zoo. But it is also very important to observe it in its natural habitat, where it can show its nature, its natural behavior, as it is in the wild. We have to observe how it behaves in various seasons and under various circumstances. This makes it possible for us to understand the behavior of that particular animal species. Similarly, if we wish to understand our body, our mind, our breath, the force which connects the two, then we have to spend time patiently, very, very patiently observing them. We might have to wait hours, sometimes even for days till something special actually happens, till something extraordinary takes place. We may observe them on a yoga mat, in a yoga studio, at a meditation center, or just in a peaceful corner of our home. But it is equally important for us to learn to observe them beyond any such confined spaces when they are out in the wild, in the world. This is what makes it possible for us to better understand them and ultimately use them for a useful and meaningful purpose. This is why we need to learn to observe the mind in our busiest moments, in every moment of our life. Initially, that might be difficult, no problem, because when we are busy, then we are so much engaged in the task at hand that retrospective awareness does not come, but it can be learned gradually. This is achieved by incorporating mindfulness into our daily lives. First of all, by punctuating moments in our life by mindfulness, such as very easy, such as while standing in a lift or while waiting for someone, for example, at the doctor's. And then ultimately, in everything that we do. The biggest challenge then comes when we try to be mindful when our mind is raging with anger or with fear or with any other similar strong emotion which might otherwise overwhelm us. So, like in a game, the challenge increases step by step. Similarly, in our yoga practice, we learn to observe. The first thing that we do, we learn to observe ourselves. First of all, our body in the postures. That's the first thing. And then we learn to observe our breath in the posture. That's the second thing. Then we learn to observe our mind in the posture. That's the third thing. And like this, gradually, when we know how to observe the mind in a posture during our formal asana practice, the same can be done in pranayama. The same can be done, further learned in meditation by sitting down in formal meditation, and then ultimately in everything that we do in our lives. This is the first aspect of what I understand by the inner way of yoga. Now, what about the second? What does it mean to bring yoga into every aspect of our lives? Just to be mindful, just to become aware that emotions are raging, just to become aware that anger has come up, or fear has come up. That's the first step. Usually, when we are angry, we are not even aware. We are so much involved, overwhelmed by the emotion that we just flare out. And there is no self-awareness. We are aware of the person on whom we are angry. We are aware of the reason why we are angry, but we are not aware of anger itself. The moment we would become aware of anger, it feels as if we take a step back. It feels as if suddenly the moment we become mindful of anger, we have mastered it. The moment we have mastered it, it's not like nothing in yoga can be called easy. It requires hard work. It requires effort. In the same way, when with practices, we learn to become mindful of anger and we step back, we gain a third person's perspective of our anger. Then we can start manipulating it. We can start do something about it. I'm just taking one emotion as an example. It can be many emotions. It can be many different emotions, particularly the emotions that unsettle us, the emotions that ruin our inner peace. There are some beautiful emotions which actually make us peaceful. For example, loving kindness, compassion, love in itself. It calms us down. But then there are rajasika emotions, raging emotions, emotions which unsettle us, emotions which make us restless. So the moment we become aware of them, we become mindful of them, then we can step back. And I will come back to what the capacity to step back, to discriminate, to distance oneself from such raging emotions. That is a great skill that sages like Patanjali speak of when they speak of the power of discrimination, the power to discriminate between myself, the seer, the experiencer, the perceiver, and the object of my perception, that which is being seen, that which is being experienced by me, that which is being perceived by me, whether it is hatred, whether it is anger, whether it is fear, or any other strong emotion that comes up. When this is possible, when this becomes possible for us as the result of our dedicated practice, then the next step, what it means to bring yoga into every aspect of our life. Here I have to give a very specific definition of yoga that I'm sure you might have heard. It is from the Gita. Yoga in the Gita and the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, and Gita, which is also known as Yoga Shastra, the Yoga Sutras, the aphorisms on yoga, and the instructions on yoga. Another name of the Gita is in fact instructions on yoga. It's a collection of instructions, ancient instructions, which are found in the Upanishads, boiled down, because Upanishads are vast. It's a vast collection of teachings, a big collection of teachings of hundreds of ancient yogic masters. Vyasa takes out the essence of that and collects it in the 700 verses by focusing himself on yoga. That is why every one of the 18th chapter of the Gita has the name which ends yoga. Arjuna Vishada Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga. Every chapter ends with the word yoga. The name of every chapter ends with the word yoga. Now, yoga for Bhagavad Gita is, forgive me if I'm sometimes using Sanskrit words, because when I use Sanskrit words, then it refreshes the idea in me. For me, these Sanskrit words, they are like seeds. They are not just words because they have roots, they have prefixes, they have suffixes, which combined together give rise to a particular type of meaning and outlook. And that's why I use them, and I know sometimes it is a little bit uncomfortable to ears that are not trained to hear these words, but rest assured, every time if I use a Sanskrit word, I will try to use as less as possible. But if I do, then I will do my best to explain it in English. And sometimes you will be amazed when you look at the similarities. For example, now the Sanskrit word, sama. Sama is in fact the same word as in English, same, S-A-M-E. You can even hear how similar they are. Sama in Sanskrit and same. To remain the same. It's as simple as that. The most simple definition of yoga, to remain the same. And yet it is so profound, because can we really remain the same in all ups and downs of life? When emotions rage, can we remain the same, really? When we are lazy, when we fall asleep, when we are tired, how can we remain the same? And yet, it is no less than this capacity to remain the same, no matter what happens in one's life, which is what ultimately yoga is about in the understanding of the Gita. Samatvam yoga uchyate. Sama, sameness, which then you can feed in different words: equanimity, equality, balance, whatever you want to call it. But just let's stick to the Sanskrit word sama and its English equivalent, same. To remain the same. That is what yoga is. When I was traveling from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast one morning, it was so beautiful how the rising sun seemed to be traveling with me. It's around 100 kilometers. We woke up early and we drove out. And I was just sitting next to my friend who was driving and looking out and seeing the sunrise over the ocean, because it's the eastern coast, and then seeing how actually the sun seemed to be traveling with me, with us, over the horizon, really running along with our car, because the speeds in Australia, like in Europe, now in India also the speeds have increased, but back then on the highways, the speed could be over 120 kilometers. So you can really feel how the sun was traveling with me. So the whole time it felt that the sun was rising and shining for me alone, because there was no one on the highway. It was, I think, a Sunday, and everybody usually takes rest in the early mornings. So if at all, there were extremely few cars. The roads were completely empty on that day. And so it felt as if it is really shining just for us, for me alone. It felt like it was keeping me company on the drive. As the landscape kept passing by, the sun stayed along beside me. It felt as if the sun was speeding along. Later on, when I was studying the Vedas more deeply, I came across the idea that the sun is sama, same. Again, this idea of sameness. This idea of sameness is so pervasive. You would be amazed the day I realized, oh my God, in the Gita, in the yogic texts, in the Vedic texts, in the Upanishads, in fact, one of the 4 Vedas, Sama Veda, which is the Veda of singing, which lies at the source of Indian classical music, There also the word Samaveda comes from this sama, this sameness. So then I came across the idea that the sun is sama, is same, and I thought of this experience. Samo diva dadrishe rujamana. The mantra says that look at this shining sun, which is shining, radiating life, heat and warmth in the heavens, and yet is totally sama, is totally always the same. How it rises, extremely auspicious, because it destroys all the darkness, enables all of us to see. The Sanskrit word for the sun means inspirer, the one that inspires nature. Look how nature wakes up. Look how birds start chirping in the morning, the moment the sun is about to start. So it inspires, and yet it is equal. It is same on all beings. It is the same with everyone. Therefore, everyone. And then the master says that because it is the same with everyone, everyone thinks it shines for me, it shines for me. It arises in front of everyone and radiates and removes the darkness for everyone. When I was traveling on that day, this was my exact thought, that it shines for me, it shines for me. Because I had this experience, I deeply connected with this mantra from the Samaveda. After thinking more deeply about it, I feel that 3 guiding principles of remaining the same can be learned from the sun. First of all, to be the same oneself in our own life, despite all the difficulties, to retain some equilibrium. That would be the first level of sameness. When we can do this, then the second level would be to be the same towards others also. And this should not be a kind of disconnect that because we are same towards all and we have to be same towards all, we remain aloof from others, but like the sun, which gives itself to everyone, to be always alongside others, with others. This would be the third challenge. And what do I mean by this? What do I mean by these 3 steps? Let me explain this a little bit. As practitioners of yoga, we can learn the following from the sun. 1, the sun, unlike the moon, never waxes or wanes. The moon increases, decreases, but the sun remains the same shape. So what the yogic masters did, because yogic masters, whatever they have learned, it becomes clearer to me day by day how deeply they have observed nature around them and learned all the yogic principles simply by observing. It was their acute power of observation through which they discovered asanas, through which they discovered external practices, and through which they derived deeper teachings of yoga that I do talk here about. So they used the sun as an ideal to inspire them to remain the same in the ups and downs of life. So that is the first aspect of the sun, that it does not wax or wane. 2, the sun also shines on all equally. It spreads its rays across the landscape in equal measure, touching and warming every living being, from a blade of grass to a tree, to an ant, to an elephant. Everyone benefits from its light. Every being with eyes And even trees who have no eyes, they immensely benefit from it. There wouldn't be life. The very source of energy, the source of life and energy that's why prana, the word that we use for this life force in our body, is also used in the Upanishads for the sun's shine. So yogic masters who tried to follow the sun, the dispeller of darkness in everything that they did by meditating on it, they learned from the sun to love and respect all beings equally. That's the second thing, to be the same towards others, which means, like Krishna in the Gita, Samoham Sarva Bhuteshu, I am the same towards all beings. I don't hate anyone, and I don't love or like anyone above someone else, but my warmth of love radiates over all beings completely, equally. Now, number 3, remember the story of my drive. I felt a deep affinity with the sun because the sun was traveling with me. And at the time, I did not think of this till I was reading these mantras and I was contemplating these mantras. But I realized that anyone coming from the opposite direction could have had exactly the similar experience. So if I was traveling from the south to the north, I felt the sun was traveling with me. If I would have been traveling at the same time from the north to the south, I would have had exactly the same experience. Although we know that there is only one sun, it has this amazing capacity, which was noticed by the Vedic masters, to be with everyone at once. No matter what path an individual follows, whether he or she is traveling from north to south, from south to north, from east to west, or from west to east, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the sun is there illuminating the path of the person, showing the path to that person, and accompanying, at least giving the feeling that it is accompanying. So we can have the sun teach us in the same way to be alongside others, even if their paths are different. And the sun has no path. The sun has nowhere to go, at least from the perspective of the earth. It is totally at the center, completely stable, not traveling anywhere at all. And yet, it is there for everyone, no matter what path they follow. So in the same way, a yogic master who has reached above the limitation of paths and is no more now stuck to a particular path and is not anymore identifying with only one particular path, but realizes something that the yogic masters did realize, that no matter what path a person takes, there are some paths. Ruchinam vaichitriyat reju kutila nana patha jusham. Due to the difference in interests, some people have these types of interests, some others have these types of interests, and we have to respect everyone's interest. And because of their different interests, there are different paths. Ruchinam vaichitriya, some paths are straightforward, some paths are a little bit curved. Depending on where a person stands, the path has to be found by them. But if we want, for example, if we want to reach a city, then depending on where the person is, there are different paths from different directions to reach the city. When conflict starts, when conflict happens, then we want people entering the city, we want to control them. And that's when we start digging trenches into paths. This is what I saw, for example, when I was traveling, giving discourses in Palestine. So, for example, if you have to reach a Palestinian city, there is only one path which you have to take. All other paths have been dug up. So you cannot take those paths. There is only one path which is fully controlled by checkpoints. That is because there is conflict. There is this sense of control that you want to control. That is why this thing arises. So the moment we want to control, we want to have one path, and we want everyone to walk on that path. The yogic pathless paths. That's why there is no yogic path. There, if at all, then there are yogic paths. Many, many paths, depending on the needs of an individual. The goal is always the same. The goal is that city center present in the very depth of our being. That is always the same. But the paths may be different. So a yogi who has transcended, one of the key descriptions of a yogi, someone who has really mastered yoga according to the 12th century master Vidyaranya Muni, I have tremendous respect for him due to his openness of thinking. What he says is that the moment a person has mastered yoga, he or she, they raise completely beyond conflict. There is no conflict in yoga, because yoga is the uniting force of all the different schools of spirituality, what you call spirituality today in India. May it be Buddhism, may it be Jainism, may it be the various schools of the Vedic traditions. In one thing that they are united, it is in yoga. Buddhists speak of yoga, Jainas speak of yoga, and the Vedic masters speak of yoga. In yoga, they are totally united. And that's why it is amazing when you explore Buddhist texts on yoga, when you explore Jaina texts on yoga, when you explore Vedic texts on yoga, one thing that they say, no matter what our difference might be there in our philosophical views or philosophical positions, when it comes to yoga, for example, Haribhadra Suri, 7th century, great Jaina master, in the very beginning, in his texts on yoga, such as Yoga Bindu, the nectar drops on yoga, what he says in the very beginning, or the compendium of the different views of yoga, what he says is that the views might be different, but yoga is one and the same in all of them. Because that's the path, how to become sane in our personal life, how to become sane towards others, and how to give them a feeling that we are totally accompanying them no matter which path they have chosen. And it's not for me to choose the path for someone else. Even if they are my student, they themselves have to decide their path. All I as a teacher can do is to help them find the path that might be most suitable to them. So yes, I agree, the practical reality might be very different. When I speak of this sameness towards all, We don't deal, for example, with a friend or a parent or a child or a colleague or a stranger in the same way. We deal with them differently. We have different relationships with them, which influences our interactions with them. But yoga is not about not only about how we, I often say that don't use yoga as a window. One of my teachers used to say this. Don't use yoga, don't use the standards of yoga as a window to look at others, but use the standards of yoga as a mirror to look at yourself. So yes, different relationships require different interactions. We have to interact differently with them, but using the standard of sameness, the idea is not to judge them, whether they are same towards me or not, but to look into oneself and to find out whether I'm able to retain this samatha. And supreme perfection in yoga, I don't know what that should mean. Complete perfection in yoga. What is a perfect asana? What is a perfect breathing pattern? What is a perfect meditation? What is a perfect japa? You can just get better at it. With practice, day by day, you can get better at it. We can learn to make less mistakes in doing something. That's all what we can do. But otherwise, the continuum is so vast, so endless, that a person, the moment they would feel that I have acquired perfection, the journey stops. And evolution stops, development stops. So there is always scope to grow further. There is always scope to be better. But every little step that we take, again, something that the Gita very emphatically puts forward, that swalpamapi, even a little bit of it. What I'm talking about is maybe sounds like idealistic, supreme perfection, because that's what the yogic masters do. They present the ideal in front of us. And not everyone might be able to reach that supreme ideal. Most of us not, but every step that we take towards it is a step out of darkness, is a step out of hatred, is a step out of the negative aspects of anger. Maybe anger can be used for something good as well, but I'm just concerned about the negative aspect, the aspect which inflicts suffering on ourselves and which inflicts suffering on ourselves. So we can learn to feel always the same towards all of them, even if we can't always express it, depending on different situations. The devotional traditions, and I said it in the very beginning, that this idea of remaining the same is so central to every aspect of yoga. So for example, even bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, though I don't really like the word devotion so much, because the idea behind devotion, and it's the most widely used word for bhakti today. Wherever you read about bhakti, it's always translated as devotion, and yet devotion is just one aspect of bhakti. There are so many different aspects of bhakti, and very literally what bhakti simply means is to serve. That's all. And how it is defined by the masters of bhakti, it means love. And when we love, when a mother loves her child, she wants to do everything for her child. When we love our beloved. We want to do everything for our beloved. It's somehow, again, to serve, but simply, let's say, to do. Because service, again, what I don't like is this idea, even in the problem with devotion, let me say it very clearly, is that the idea that there is a devotee and then there is something higher to be devoted to. And yet, if you go deeper into the devotional traditions, yes, that's how it starts. That there is a devotee and then there is something to be or someone to be devoted to. And so there is a sense of hierarchy in the beginning, but then what happens at some point when you go deeper into the bhakti traditions, suddenly it flips. And sometimes the devotee becomes the object of devotion, and the object of devotion becomes the devotee. And there is no one higher, no one lower, but ultimately they become one and united into one single union, in which there is no one higher and no one lower, but it is just a complete mutual embrace of love, in which there is no sense of hierarchy. And somehow, in my limited understanding of English, the word devotion and devotee undermines this central idea of bhakti, central idea of the devotional traditions, where in complete union, sometimes God becomes the devotee of the devotee. God worships the devotee. The devotee becomes God and God becomes the devotee. Or both of them, they become one. So in this tradition, even in this tradition of supreme love, the idea of samatva, the idea to retain this sameness in one's personal life towards others, this has been described to be the greatest form of worship of the divine by Prahlada, one of the greatest masters of the devotional tradition. That samatva, just the capacity to cultivate this sameness in one's life. This is the highest form of worship of the divine, which is present, equally present within all beings. Usually, the tendency in religions, and I'm seeing it here also in places like Rishikesh, where people speak a lot about God realization. Even sometimes the advertisements on the roads, they show people looking up, as if God is somewhere up there. In the yogic traditions, the divinity, the divine, is always, if at all, then it is here, where the feelings of love are felt, from where the nectar of love oozes. So for a yogi, whenever yoginam hridaye harihi, one of the core ideas of yoga is that the divine for a yogi, the text gives a whole list that this tradition sees the divine there, this tradition sees the divine there, this tradition finds the divine in statues, this tradition finds the divine in pictures, this tradition finds the divine in fire, this tradition finds the divine in the sun, this tradition finds so many different traditions. But for the yogic traditions, the divine is always present within the hearts of all beings. So now, and this might sound a little bit standard, but just to reiterate that I feel that the practice of the yamas, and we so often speak about the yamas, non-violence, truthfulness, non-hoarding, etc. They teach us to be the same towards others. What I want us to have a different perspective. In that sense, what I'm saying is non-standard. Because I'm connecting the yama with sama. Yama as a means to cultivate sama towards others, to cultivate this sameness towards others. Why to practice non-violence? Why to practice truthfulness? Why to practice non-hoarding? Why not to hoard more things than are necessary of ourselves? Because we care for others. Because we want to be equal towards others. Because we want to be same towards others. This is why we practice yamas. Not because Patanjali has said it. Not because yoga wants us to practice them. But because we want to be equal towards others. We want to be the same towards others. That is why yama is important. Similarly, the niyamas, for example, inner purity, inner cleanliness, cleaning up the mind, contentment, austerity. And I'm just using one English word. In fact, the Sanskrit words can have a range of meaning. And today I'm not here to go into all of that. Which people, just whenever the word tapas comes, they just translate it as austerity and that's it. And tapas always remains austerity. And yet tapas can mean so many things. Self-study can mean so many things. Offering the rewards of our deeds back to all beings, the fifth yama, the fifth niyama. Why all of these? Because they teach us, they give us the opportunity to learn to be the same oneself at all times. Why austerity? Why voluntary hardship? Why take upon oneself the pain and discomfort that we experience in asana practice, in pranayama practice? The boredom that we experience in meditation initially. Why all of that? Just to have a fit body? Just for that? No. So that we can retain some equilibrium at all times, so that we become strong enough from within, that we can attain equanimity in our lives. We can retain this equanimity even in difficult moments, even in painful moments, even in moments of discomfort. So yes, asana practice is uncomfortable. Can I remain the same in the face of a difficult asana? Let me test myself there, and then I can test myself in other similar difficult circumstances. So no matter what the external circumstances are, they teach us to be the same oneself at all times. And only when we are the same oneself at all times, then otherwise our sameness towards others will be fake. We will have a mask of a smiling face showing others, but deep down, if we are tremendously sad, how long will we fake a smile? Yes, sometimes one of my teachers used to say, fake it till you make it. So that's also completely fine. But ultimately, sameness has to come from within. Only then we can be same towards others. And then the third principle that the yogic masters learned by observing the sun, to be alongside others, not only to be the same towards others, but to actually accompany them, to be with them. So practicing loving kindness, practicing compassion, practicing joyfulness, practicing forgiveness, which are known as the four viharas, the divine pastimes. Like the Sanskrit word vihara is used for an evening stroll, where you are completely relaxed. You have done everything that you have to do. Now you're totally mentally tired, maybe not physically. And so you go for an evening walk, you are strolling in a beautiful garden. That is called vihara. The vihara of the meditators, of the deep meditators, is practicing loving kindness, compassion, joyfulness, forgiveness. These four make it possible for us to be alongside others, to be with others. Before I continue, let me quickly see, there have been some questions, if there have been any questions. So yes, my question is, what comes first, thought or feeling? If you know the answer. Okay. Chicken and egg. Does thought first come or does feeling first come? The way the mind works, to be very honest, feelings seem to come first. First of all, a particular feeling comes up. And then when a feeling comes up, the mind, which is constantly making sense of things and interpreting things and saying, okay, this means this means this. So if this particular feeling has come up. So for example, if my heart starts beating in a certain circumstance, so the first thing, this sensation comes up, how my heart is beating strongly in my chest. And then my mind looks for interpretations. That why is it? Maybe because I've seen an elephant. This actually happened a few days ago, because a few months ago, because in the forest we have an elephant. So then the moment I saw this elephant, my heart started rushing fast. And then my mind interprets it as fear. Now maybe I'm in love with someone and I see my beloved. The same thing happens. My heart starts beating. The moment I see my lover, my heart starts beating. But now my mind interprets it completely differently. Now, because in these circumstances, I see my beloved and I interpret this heartbeat, this strong heartbeat, as representing love. So in this, by this simple experience, I feel that feelings, sensations do come up first, and then as the mind comes into the picture, particularly the interpretive mind, and starts interpreting it, that is when thoughts come up. So, but I agree that it is like a okay. The second, the other question was, what is the Sanskrit word for heart that you said is included in the intellect, buddhi? Yes, hridaya, hrit or hridaya. Like most English, because English and Sanskrit, they belong to the same Indo-European linguistic family of languages, and that's why they are very similar. So heart is related to the Sanskrit word hridaya. And sometimes when the Upanishads use the word hridaya, in fact, Shankaracharya, the great commentator from the 8th century, explains always that it refers to buddhi, the intellect. So yes, it is hridaya, the heart. Regarding all what you said, what is the place of karma following us, one life after another? This is again this would be a completely separate discussion on its own. Karma, in short, is for karma samskaras, the samskara, the subtle impressions that every activity and every experience leaves behind on our mind. And the more we experience something, or the more we act something out, the stronger the subtle impression of that becomes. And these subtle impressions, precisely because they are unconscious, we are not conscious of these subtle impressions, they deeply influence everything that we do, every thought that we think, every word that we speak, and every action that we do. And in fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration if I would say that yoga is all about transforming non-yogic samskaras, non-yogic conditioning, which are conditionings that just have come about without us being mindful, without us understanding what we are doing, just because we did certain things many times. Certain conditionings have arisen in our mind to replace these types of conditionings with well-informed conditionings. With conditionings, because the mind, the moment it does something 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, it starts getting conditioned. So then why not? Hatred is just a conditioning. Anger is a conditioning. We are conditioned. Since our animal pasts, whether you believe in modern sciences, we were animals back then, or whether you believe from a yogic rebirth perspective that some births we were animals. So these samskaras are there over the births. These samskaras have repeatedly been strengthened because we have expressed ourselves in the same way. Whenever our ego feels threatened, we flare out, we react that way. It is so deeply conditioned. I, as an individual, try my best, and yet it flares out, it comes. But why? Similarly, this is an ayogaja samskara, a non-yogic conditioning. But why cultivating loving kindness? Why cultivating compassion? Why cultivating forgiveness? By thinking these thoughts again and again. Then by saying, first of all, when it comes very strongly, by thinking these thoughts again and again, we think more and more. Our thinking gets conditioned by loving kindness, by compassion, by forgiveness. Then our words, then more it gets expressed in our words, the stronger the samskara becomes. And then the more we act it out, the stronger it becomes. And a day comes when automatically, and you can see this in the lives of many great saints and sages. Jesus Christ, when he was crucified, oh my Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. How did this come? This came because he had conditioned. From a yogic perspective, we don't use the word conditioning, we use the word samskara. The samskara of upeksha, the samskara of kshama, the samskara of forgiveness was so strong in him that that was his natural reaction. Instead of getting angry on them, instead of swearing at them, instead of saying mean words to them, he asked for forgiveness, because that was his. That was how his samskara. So karma is just samskaras. They are just samskaras. Karma in yoga is the short for samskaras. And karma is never ever destiny. I don't have enough time to go into details in these things, but one of the great texts of Yoga Vasishtha, the favorite text of Swami Satchidananda, of Swami Venkateshananda, whose pictures you, for example, have in your beautiful website of the European Union of Yoga, their favorite text. One of the difference between destiny and karma samskara is that destiny gives the impression that destiny cannot be changed, but karma can always be changed. Karma samskaras, you can always do something. You can always improve. You can always change. You can always transform. It's not hard written. It's not hard wired. There is always a possibility to improve. So I will come back to other questions as well, but let me finish the talk that I wanted to convey, and then I will come back to the beautiful questions that you have asked. So the practical approach. Now, what I have just said sounds about sameness. I was talking about sameness. Sounds very beautiful and maybe even very inspiring. But we struggle immensely when we attempt to make these a practical reality of our lives. This is because our Rajasika mental states which are which arise when Rajoguna is dominated. I will briefly talk about these three gunas, but I suppose that most of us in the field of yoga know what Sattva Guna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna is. And because it is a core idea given by sage Kapila as one of the core ideas of yoga, I have to use these words. Please forgive me. Rajasika mental states where Rajoguna, the quality of activity, rages. It is sometimes also in the yogic texts, it is also referred to as the turbulent states or the raging states, such as the ones filled with desire, hatred, fear, etc. Make it very difficult for us to live by those lofty principles. We want to live, we want to be sane. We want to be sane towards. Honestly, I know when I speak with my fellow yoga practitioners, and when I look at myself, I want to be sane. I'm deeply awed by this idea, but I cannot. Sometimes when desires clash, hatreds arise, certain fears, they are reality. What to do then? When they start raging, conflict occurs. Then they make it very difficult for us to live by those lofty principles. Similarly, when tamasika mental states arise, when the mind is dominated by tamoguna, the quality of inactivity, the quality of inertia, which are also known sometimes as confused states, as the dull states, such as when we're in the evening after we have had our dinner, we just want to recline. We become lazy, negligent, torpor overtakes us, ignorance, we want to fall asleep. So these mental states also make it impossible for us to constantly live by those lofty principles, whether sometimes the raging states or sometimes the dull states. Both make it, the turbulent states as well as the dull states, make it very, very difficult for us to live by those lofty principles. We can say that those two types of mental states seriously hinder our progress on the path of samatva, on the path of cultivating this sameness. So the solution to this problem was to cultivate sattvika mental states where sattva guna, the quality of light. I don't really like these translations, but I'm using them because they are the most widely, the quality of light, the quality of activity, and the quality of inertia. The three qualities of our nature, the three qualities of the nature of the mind. Transparently clean, hyperactivity, and laziness. These three qualities that we see in ourselves. So at the moment I'm sticking with that, and then I'll briefly say why I don't really like, because these words have nothing to do with the way they are translated in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, they are beautiful words. and they give us a very different perspective when we look at them. But let's call them peaceful states. And peace and joy, because in the Eastern notion of happiness, there are two types of happiness. One is the happiness that comes out of excitement. But the yogis say that you cannot be super excited 24/7. So the happiness that is dependent on excitement is not sustainable. It cannot be sustained over a long period of time. You would actually wear yourself out. If a person would be super excited 24/7, they would kill themselves. So what we have to look for is a peaceful joy. And in sattva, peace and joy, they come together. The moment yogis speak of sattva, they always, peace and joy, they seem as if, or you can say peaceful joy, they seem as if they are two sides of the same coin. And wisdom is somewhere in between. Wisdom is in between, and this wisdom gets expressed, this clarity gets expressed through peace and through calm happiness, a smiling happiness, not a happiness derived out of excitement, but a happiness which is sustainable. And when such mental states are cultivated, that makes it easy for us to live by those lofty principles such as samatva. Therefore, the practical way of cultivating samatva, equanimity in life, equality, sameness in life, would be now to strengthen sattvaguna and weaken rajoguna and tamoguna, which are usually generally strong. During the day, we are running all around, so much busy, hyperactive, rajoguna, the whole day, rajoguna. And then, because when there is a crest, inevitably in a wave, a trough will follow. You cannot continue a wave cannot continue, however strong the wave might be, it cannot continue to rise. At some point, it also has to fall. So tamoguna is the other extreme, rajoguna is one extreme, and tamoguna is the other extreme. Hyperactivity and inactivity, inertia, these are the two extremes. And sattvaguna is the equilibrium in between. And this is why my favorite way of explaining rajoguna, tamoguna, and sattvaguna, which comes from Shiva Yoga text known as Spandakarika, the verses on movement, on vibration, on pulsation, where the masters describe the three gunas as vibrations, as pulsations. So that's why I like the wave model. That rajoguna would be the crest, tamoguna would be the trough, and sattvaguna would be the equilibrium, where neither the wave rises too much, nor falls, nor goes down too much. But it is more like a sustainable, like when the ocean is peaceful, when the lake is totally peaceful. That sattvaguna. Now, how to cultivate that? That's the question. Of course, the three gunas can also be explained through the example of a mirror. Tamoguna, which means, because tamas means darkness. So, and if you think of the mind as a mirror, then the effect that darkness would have on a mirror out there, the fact that you can't see anything, you can't see yourself. When it becomes totally dark, the room becomes totally dark, you don't see yourself. If it is less dark, you don't see yourself clearly. The same thing happens when we completely fall asleep. In deep sleep, we have no experience of ourselves anymore. Before that, in the dreaming state, we have a very unclear, confused, distorted understanding of ourselves. This is the effect of tamoguna on our mind. Rajoguna, rajas means dust in Sanskrit. So the effect that dust has on a mirror, the same effect the Rajasika mental states, such as desire, hatred, fear, they color our thoughts. When there is desire, deep desire in us, then it colors every thought. Every thought goes into that direction. If there is hatred, then it colors every thought, every word, and every action that we do. When there is fear, it colors every thought. Why? Because like dust, that's why the word raga also sometimes is used in Sanskrit. Coloring, because they color. Rajas, in fact, means that which colors. Raj means to color. Dust which colors. And the effect that dust would have on a mirror, you would see yourself, but not with clarity. That dust would appear to be on your face. That is the work of Rajoguna. And Sattva Guna. Sattva simply means, Sattva is the natural state of being. If you let the mirror be in its natural state of being, it will neither there is darkness, nor there is dust. It is totally clean and just left as it is. Then it would reflect my face with utmost clarity. That is Sattva Guna. Now, the purpose of every yogic practice is to strengthen Sattva Guna in the numerous layers of our being, this balance. For example, yamas, strengthen it in the outermost layer which we have, the layer of interpersonal relationships, the layer on which we interact with others. There, non-violence brings balance. Truthfulness brings balance. Niyamas strengthen Sattva Guna or balance in our personal behavior, the way we behave when we are in our own. For example, austerity. Now, austerity, the moment we think of austerity, we think of extremes. That is because, yes, many cultures go into extremes in the name of austerity. The yogic view of austerity is completely different. It is all about avoiding extremes of luxury. That's why we call it austerity. But it is also avoiding extremes of discomfort, but finding the medium path. That is what tapas, for example, is about. Asana, look at an asana. Here you would be very clearly, you can see. Asana is the kind of exercise in which neither you are hyperactive nor you are not doing anything. The body from outside is totally still. In an asana, the body is totally still. Recently, I was called to a talk in UK where the question that I was asked, many doctors, they recommend Pilates over asanas. Many doctors in Switzerland, a doctor that I knew in Switzerland, he argued with me and said that Pilates is better than asanas. Why? Because it has a bigger range of movement. But the purpose of asana is different. The purpose of asana is to still the body. Yes, maybe for movements, that's a different thing. In asanas also we have a lot of movements. But ultimately, the purpose of asana is not to provide movement. And as a doctor, particularly after accidents, for healing purposes and all these purposes, I deeply respect that view as well. That yes, Pilates would be certainly is helpful. And many people benefit from it. But the purpose of the yogic path is to have an active stillness, to avoid extremes of movement, extreme of activity and inactivity, and asana practice allows us to achieve that. If I'm standing in one asana, or sitting or standing, or whatever I'm doing in an asana, I have to be tremendously active. There is tremendous hard work involved, and yet from outside, I'm completely still. So here you can see, it's neither if there would be a lot of movement in an asana, then it would lean towards Rajoguna. If there would be no work at all, no hard work at all, such as when I lie down in my bed. Even Shavasana requires tremendous hard work, but let's not get into that. But when I lie down, that's why lying down in my bed is not Shavasana. Shavasana is totally something different. The corpse posture is completely different. It has nothing to do with lying down, but when I lie down in my bed, the whole day I'm moving, and then I lie down in my bed, I go into tamas. There is no activity, but then I'm in tamas. The whole day there is activity, but I'm in rajas. Our asana practice brings both together. There is tremendous hard work, tremendous inner activity, and yet externally from the outside, you don't see any activity at all. The body is totally still. This is sattva. This is equilibrium. This is the balance between rajas and tamas. This is samatva. And in the same way, like asana brings sattva from a very physical viewpoint into our body by avoiding both extremes. You cannot fall asleep in an asana. There's tremendous hard work there, and yet there is no visible activity there. So you see the point how sattva, how it literally brings sattva into the body. Then pranayama strengthens sattva guna in our breathing patterns, which are deeply related to our emotions. And like this, you could continue. Pratyahara, the withdrawing of the senses, strengthens. What does withdrawal of the senses? It's not pulling back the senses. It is freeing the senses from this constant judgment. The moment the senses see something, this is good because this is useful for me, this is bad because this is useless for me, or this is harmful for me, this constant judgment of good and bad, good and bad. Vyasa in his commentary on the Sutra of Pratyahara makes it so clear that withdrawing the senses, in fact, simply means to rid our experience of the world through the senses from this constant tendency of this is good, this is pleasant, this is beneficial, this is useful for me, this is bad. Freeing from that. And similarly, dharana, sustaining the mind, it brings sattva into the mind. Dhyana, meditation, brings it into the intellect. Here, as a passing remark, I must tell you one thing, which rarely, if ever, is spoken about. Rarely, if ever. Usually, when you look at the yogic texts, what you find, always the yogic masters speak about methods and practices, how to strengthen sattva guna, the quality of light, the quality of clarity, as people translate it these days, how to strengthen it in every layer of our being, as if strengthening it is the supreme goal of yoga, and it should suppress rajoguna and tamoguna completely, and should just become like a king, controlling all our thoughts, words, and deeds. No, no, no. That's not the idea. There is a beautiful passage in the Mahabharata, in the context of yoga, which says that, you see, a body, a physical body, can only be said to be truly healthy when all the three bodily humors, known as the three doshas in Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, wind, bile, and phlegm, which, by the way, are also referred by the word guna. Many yogic texts and many Ayurvedic texts refer to these three also as guna, as physical gunas. For a physical body to be completely healthy, all the three have to be in a balanced state, in balanced proportion. The same way the master of the Mahabharata suggests And Mahabharata is the same text from which the Bhagavad Gita has been derived, the same text. So we can have the same respect. And there are sections in the Mahabharata. For example, the 12th book, which is the book on peace, which is all about yoga. The book on peace, it's the biggest section of the 18 section. The Mahabharata is divided into 18 sections. The 12th section is the biggest section, and it is the section on peace. People don't even study these texts today, and yet it's an encyclopedic work from maybe the 1st or 2nd century AD, which collects all yogic ideas that were there. And one of the ideas that struck me because before I came across this idea, I always thought strengthening sattva, strengthening the good qualities. No, to bring them, because usually rajas and tamas, the hyperactive and the inactive ones, are naturally strengthened. The whole day rajas is strengthened, the whole night tamas is strengthened. They never come into equilibrium. That is why masters continue to speak about strengthening balance, strengthening sattva, strengthening the sattva quality. But just for that purpose, so that they can come into an equal proportion. Because for a mind to be completely healthy, the master says that all the 3 gunas have to be in sama. There should be sameness, equality, even in the 3 gunas. Not only striving for sattva guna, a balanced proportion. Rajas is also required after you have meditated a lot. Let the body be active. Do active asana practice. Go for a walk. Strengthen your rajas as well. And then after everything has been done, then also go to sleep. Sleeping is equally important. That's why in the chapter on meditation, in the 6th chapter, Krishna says that when our food, when our work, and when our sleep, all are in balanced proportions, only then yoga can truly be mastered, and only then yoga can eradicate suffering. So all of them have to be, all the 3 gunas have to be in balanced proportion. You must be wondering what happens in samadhi, because I just talked about meditation, not about deep absorption. That is when a person transcends and go beyond all the 3 gunas. It is a beautiful state where the yogi does not cling to positive feelings or emotions or thoughts, nor feels any aversion towards negative ones. So if rajasika, or which means raging thoughts, come up, he or she witnesses that as well. If dullness comes up because now the mind has become tired, he or she witnesses that as well, and then falls asleep. Sleep itself becomes a meditation. If you meditatively fall asleep, the whole sleep will become a meditation. And the moment you wake up, you will continue to meditate. Simple. And when peaceful thought comes up, when peaceful mental states come up, he witnesses them as well. Neither does he or she cling to positive states, nor he or she feels aversion towards negative ones. That is gunatita, udasina. Asana means to sit, and udasina means to sit above, to levitate. You know, it's famous in the 18th, 19th centuries, when ideas related to yoga first came to the West. This notion of levitating yogis came, and it comes from here. So it's not about physical levitation. It's about levitating over positive and negative mental states. That's what udasina, that's what levitation, in fact, in yoga means. So our approach to our practice of yoga matters immensely. With the correct approach to our practice, we can use it to evolve as a human being. This is what I see as the ultimate goal that the masters had in mind. First of all, of course, freedom from ignorance. Ignorance means forgetfulness of the fact that I don't have to be involved with my emotions. I can step back and just look at them and let them happen. They will pass. In the same way as anger arose, it will vanish. It will be there for a while and then it will vanish. I can, if I want, then I can step back and just look at it. Neither hate it, but just witness it for what it is. This is what Patanjali calls the knowledge of discrimination, the knowledge of the separation, the realization of the separation, or the becoming mindful of the separation of the person, the seer and the seen, me from what I am experiencing. My experience does not define me, does not have to define me. I can step back. Yoga has a very specific view, specific understanding of ignorance. Ignorance is not something to be thrown away, but rather, and this might come as a surprise, our ignorance is to be embraced. Embraced in the sense, because the yogic masters, it is Sridhara Acharya in his commentary on Vishnu Purana, another great work on one of the key works that commentators on the Yoga Sutras often quote. He explains something very beautiful, that ignorance, which we seem to hate so much, is in fact the scabbard hiding the blade of wisdom that cuts asunder the seer from the seen. A beautiful image. This is our ignorance, ignorance of my true nature, ignorance of myself, ignorance of the capacity that I am actually different from my emotions. This is like a scabbard, in which you put the blade, and the blade is hidden. So the blade of wisdom, the blade always in the yogic texts, whenever you see a sword, for example, a sword in the hands of Patanjali, what is it doing? Yogi, Patanjali is a great yogi. He is the master of non-violence. What is a sword doing in his hand in some of the pictures? This is because in yogic symbolical representations, the blade, the sword, represents wisdom, because it cuts asunder. It makes us aware of the discrimination, the distinction between me and my experiences. It enables me to have to be like a lotus in water and yet untouched, to be like a swan in water and yet untouched by it. If you want to use a modern expression, Teflon mind, you know, at home we have these non-sticky utensils in which you cook food so that it doesn't stick there. That's called Teflon. So a Teflon-like mind where nothing sticks, but things just pass. That is what this wisdom, this yogic wisdom, do. And the ignorance that the masters speak of is the scabbard hiding it. So, but why? Why this? Why should I do this? That's the question. Why? Why should I have a Teflon-like mind? Why should my mind be like the leaves of a lotus or like a swan, which does not become influenced, wet with water, or influenced by emotions? The masters often, in one of the Upanishads, it is beautifully that after you have acquired all scholarship and you have become a great scholar, then practice detachment towards all your knowledge and become like a child. which weeps when it is hungry and giggles most of the time otherwise. That's life. Why to worry about things? A child's mind is a Teflon mind. It does not keep things. It does not keep anger. Things just come and pass, and it giggles otherwise most of the time. So here the purpose is, like the most ancient masters, the most ancient collection of teachings of yoga, the Rigveda puts it, to become a good human being. So that out of these good human beings, radiant ones can be created. Manurbhava, become a good human being first, and then try to produce a radiant being out of yourself. The Sanskrit word for human being, manushya, has a beautiful meaning. It means that someone who has an animal which has the capacity to think. Man, human, you have this man, mind, the same root everywhere, the capacity to mind, to think. So a human, a man, a woman, a manushya, a manava in Sanskrit, is someone who can think before they act. An animal which has the capacity to actually think about the consequences of that activity before they act. In one of the yogic texts, Vijnana Bhikshu, in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras, quotes some quotation. I don't know from where, I have not been able to trace it, but he explains, barbarians are those who realize the consequences only after they have committed the actions and when they have to taste the result. Those are uncivilized barbarians. A civilized human being is someone who can think of the consequences before acting. The way sometimes some of my friends in Switzerland are very much involved in the climate talks, and when we have discussions, and how they tell me how sometimes governments talk about the climate, the only thing that comes to my mind, that we have more uncivilized barbarians than we have civilized human beings. It seems to be sad, but true. Forgive me if that's a painful remark. But that would be what yoga understands as become a human being. And then what is a radiant being? A radiant being is someone who has obtained the light of wisdom and the resultant noble virtues and qualities in his or her life. The quality of samatva, the quality of loving kindness, compassion, and all of these that we have been talking about. Because they arise out of the light of wisdom, they are referred to as the radiant qualities, the divine qualities. In fact, the English word divine is deeply related to the Sanskrit word divya guna, divya. And in Sanskrit, divya, the root div, means radiance, brilliance. It refers to light. So a divine quality, but because with divine we start thinking about God, so that's why I prefer to use the word radiant. Because this is now not about religion, but it's about just being a radiant being, a being which has the light of wisdom, a being which, as the Gita puts it, is constantly engaged in the well-being of all beings selflessly. To become a devotee, as I said, rather a person who loves the omnipresent light and thus is endowed with unswerving love and devotion for all living beings, because the same light is present within the hearts of all beings, as taught by the great devotional master Prahlada. To become someone who, instead of being inspired by their desires, hatred, or fear, this is how governments, companies, they make us buy things, they make us do what they want us to do. They play with our desires, they give us dreams and they say that, you see, you have these desires and you can fulfill them by this. Or then, if that's what I think every government and every company does, every corporate world does, but some, they even play with the hatred of people. They play with the fear of the people. Those are the worst kinds, because they flare up hatred and then play with the hatred. They flare up fear. That's why so many countries, they always need another enemy country against which they can unite their people, unite out of fear. So you can make, that's why the yogic masters say, as long as we are in the clutches of desire, hatred, and fear, we will always be slaves of other kings. True freedom comes only when we free ourselves from desire, hatred, and fear. Because then no one can enslave us. Till we are slaves of these three, anyone playing with these three can enslave us. But the moment we are free from these three, then there is no enslaving anymore. So instead of being inspired by these three, to be inspired by loving kindness, compassion, joyfulness, and forgiveness, to become someone who sees the entire earth as one single family, as exclaimed by the masters of the Upanishads after realization that this whole earth is like, he or she belongs to me and they belong to some other groups. These are the thoughts of those who have not yet worked on their hearts. Those whose hearts are now open, for them the whole earth becomes like one family, because they see the earth as their mother. Bhumihi Mata, this earth is my mother and I am the child of this earth. And beautiful, these hymns in the most ancient yogic texts on Mother Earth are so beautiful. One of the beautiful ideas that I like so much is that the master is praising the earth as a home to diverse people with diverse tongues, with diverse customs, and to all species. It is like the idea of home, sweet home, to all of us, no matter how different languages we speak, how different customs we have, how many different colors we have, how many different religions we have. That all doesn't matter. For a yogi, that should never matter. And such a person will naturally think about Earth's environment and will try to live their lives in such a way to leave as little impact on it as possible, by practicing contentment, by practicing non-holding. The strength to achieve all this is to be derived from our practice of yoga. This is why the masters always say there is no greater inner strength than the strength that one derives by practicing yoga. In fact, we all already have the strength to achieve this. Our powers just need to be focused. The rays of the sun already have the power to set the paper alight. You just need to focus them with the lens. Our yoga, our practice of asana, pranayama, meditation simply provide the lens required to focus our energy, and lo, the impossible becomes possible. Even if sameness seems so impossible, even that becomes possible. If becoming a real human being seems so difficult or so impossible to some, maybe difficult to some, it becomes easier by this. And if our practice of yoga doesn't lead us to become such a human being, then I think it is high time to rethink our approach to yoga. Then we have, or we are taking yoga into, we have taken yoga into a non-yogic direction. I would end my talk on this note, and not to end it on a negative note. I would end it with a beautiful sentence that my master always used to recite. It's from the Shiva Sutras. Smera, smera, stimita, vikasita. Smile, smile, be still, and let your heart bloom. Smile, smile, be still, and bloom. Thank you very much for joining me today.